Good morning, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, and everything else in between. Welcome to another live stream, and today it's going to be a martial arts related live stream. I haven't done one of these for a while, so let's go back to martial arts. Let's go back to what the channel is all about and talk about specifically Taekwondo. So, for those who are not familiar with Taekwondo, you get two main styles, so to speak, of Taekwondo. You get what's called ITF Taekwondo, International Taekwondo, which some people regard ITF as the original style of Taekwondo, or certainly the more traditional style of Taekwondo. Then you get the other Taekwondo, which is known as World Taekwondo, WT Taekwondo. Now, WT Taekwondo, until quite recently, used to be called WTF Taekwondo, World Taekwondo Federation. But the WTF had a big meeting, and they're like, look, we need to change the name of our organization because W is also known as what the fuck. And basically, the Olympic Taekwondo people, which is the WT, didn't want to be associated with what the fuck, so they changed it simply to World Taekwondo. So those are the two main styles. Explained a little bit that ITF is regarded as more traditional, which generally means it hasn't necessarily changed as much since it was very, formed. Taekwondo basically came out mostly from Shotokan karate when the Japanese controlled Korea at the end of World War II, or during the first half of the 20th century. Japanese occupation was brutal of Korea, much like anywhere else in Eastern Asia. Japanese occupation was very harsh, but the Japanese wanted to crack down on Korean culture. And part of that cultural genocide, so to speak, was to actually get rid of Korean martial arts. So a lot of the indigenous Korean martial arts were forbidden. Koreans weren't allowed to practice them, and many Koreans were drafted into the Japanese army, forced conscription, or they were taken off to Japanese labor camps in Japanese occupied territories or Japan itself. They were taught as part of cultural assimilation into Japanese sphere of influence. They were taught Japanese martial arts. So a lot of the Koreans, upon liberation, when they came back to Korea, they were training and teaching a lot of Japanese arts, predominantly, like I said, Shotokan karate. They were doing judo, they were doing kendo, jiu-jitsu. And this to the Koreans was very, very hurtful. The Koreans were thinking, like, we've just been oppressed by Japan and we're basically training Japanese martial arts. So there was a lot of pride involved, a lot of maybe sort of like jingoism as well. The Koreans were like, let's start making Korean martial arts again. And Taekwondo came out of Shotokan karate. So the ITF style of Taekwondo to begin with was very heavily based on Shotokan. Very long stances, all the basic techniques, the basic blocks, the basic punches and strikes could all be found in Shotokan. And this is where the WT Taekwondo kind of like branched off a little bit. But ITF based themselves what is now North Korea. I mean, at the time of Korea was never two countries. Korea was just one mass, and it was just called Korea. You didn't have North Korea. You didn't have South Korea. What came as North Korea and South Korea came around as a result at the end of World War II, when the Soviets took control of the northern part of the peninsula and the Americans took control of the southern part. They temporarily divided it with the goal of eventually reuniting the two countries together. That hasn't happened to this day, 2026, and has led on to all sorts of other complications as well. If you want to read about Korean history, it's a very complex situation. It's almost like an Israel-Gaza similarity or correlation, so to speak. But ITF was created by an individual who was a North Korean, we'd say now, but at the time he was just a Korean, happened to live in the part of the country, a northerner. And at the end of Korean War, or World War II, sorry, he found himself on the southern part of the hemisphere, or southern part of the peninsula rather, and he wanted to go back to his his hometown, his host city in the northern part of Korea. But when he went back, by this time Korea had been divided, so he was actually going to North Korea. So the history on that side is that the North Koreans say that he returned to North Korea, whereas the South Koreans say he defected to North Korea. So that's all depending on what historical viewpoint you take and who you have sympathies for, South Koreans or the North Korean side of events. But for the most part, ITF is largely based in North Korea. Whether to say that's a North Korean martial art is somewhat controversial and somewhat debatable, but it has more of a footing in North Korea than it does in South Korea. ITF schools do exist in South Korea, of course, but just not as many. There's actually more ITF schools around the world than there are in South Korea. However, then you get the other style, which we explained, which was WT Taekwondo. And WT Taekwondo is very much more heavily South Korean based. They have the headquarters in Seoul, in South Korea. The Kukkiwon, the World Taekwondo headquarters, is in Seoul. And North Korea, to the best of my knowledge, I could be very well mistaken on this, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't think I've ever been aware of a North Korean WT Taekwondo school. If they were to teach Taekwondo, it will be ITF. So those are the political differences between the two of them. What I'd say from a sport perspective as well, actually, is that WT Taekwondo is the Olympic version of Taekwondo. And that applies to the sparring aspect. Both ITF and WT have sparring competitions internationally as well. They also have forms competitions as well, whereas ITF use a set of forms known as tools, and WT Taekwondo has a set of forms known as pumsi. There are world championships for pumsi in WT Taekwondo, but that's not part of the Olympics. If you were to say, I'm going off to the World Pumsi Championships, that's not to say you're off to the Olympics. You can only get into the Olympics via the sparring, the kurugi, as it's known in Korean. But in terms of technique-wise, then taking away the pumsi, taking away the tool, taking away the historical things, let's now just look at the sparring differences and similarities between ITF Taekwondo and WT. There are some similarities because, of course, ITF and WT, they are both Taekwondo at the end of the day. So they're going to share core similarities. Where they have differences is just like peripheral, I'd say, and scoring techniques as well. But that's something we're going to be explaining and discussing. So let's start off with ITF Taekwondo. So ITF Taekwondo, if you go to an ITF competition and you want to do sparring, you are going to be entering what is known as light contact or semi-contact. That means that all the techniques are not going to be full power. Or in theory, they shouldn't be full power. But let me tell you, I've been in ITF sparring competitions and nobody gives any mind to semi-contact or light contact. I went to a competition a few years back in Manchester, and it was more like a UFC fight, and this was meant to be an ITF competition, semi-contact, and it was anything but. So even though it's meant to be semi-contact, you're still going to get concussed, you're still going to get your bruises, you're still going to get knocked out. And these are all very common occurrences. So don't be fooled if you were to enter an ITF competition and you were told you're going to be only entering under semi-contact. What kind of techniques are you going to get, or what kind of gear are you going to get kitted out with? You go to the ITF competition, it's your first time, what can you expect to get kitted out in? In boxing, you just have your boxing gloves. MMA, you have your MMA gloves. Kyokushin, you have even less. So in ITF, you are going to have foot protectors, which are generally these big, like, boots that they're known as sparring boots. Personally, I hate them. I think they're cumbersome. They do restrict your mobility to a degree. They make your feet really, really sweaty, and they're generally just very uncomfortable to wear. But the benefit of that is that it minimizes your feet injuries. And one of the most common injuries that I've ever sustained in doing Taekwondo practice is that you get injuries to your insteps, you get injuries to your shins, and you get injuries to the connection just between your foot and your shin. From if you go to do a kick and you clobber somebody's elbow, it's really painful to receive that type of injury. But the boots help protect that. They're protecting your feet, they're protecting your ankles, they're protecting your shins. Also, as well, if you were to kick somebody in the head with those boots, it's going to do significantly less damage long term than if you were doing it barefoot to both the kicker and to the person you kicked. So you're going to be kitted out with these boots. Usually they'll be either black or blue. If you're going for top-notch ITF sparring competitions, you'll be kitted out with black or blue, and you'll be told Hong Chong, Hong being red, Chong being blue, and they'll say, right, Hong Chong, whichever color you're called out as, that's the color you get kitted out into. So you'll put on your red sparring boots or you'll put on your blue sparring boots. Again, that is very much a trait that ITF Taekwondo inherited from karate, because karate competitions are generally red and blue as well if you watch karate kumite, not including Kyokushin, because that's a completely different kettle of fish. You'll also, as well as the boots, you'll also wear gloves. Now, these gloves are big sparring gloves, point sparring gloves. Your hand will fit inside, it'll cover your whole knuckles, and there'll be a slot to cover your thumb. And it'll probably go down to about here on your wrist. Contrary to the boots, I actually quite like those gloves because it's fully encompassing and protecting your whole hand, and it's nice and chunky on the knuckle part as well. And they're generally quite soft, so you can land punches which are not actually going to be that painful to the person you're punching, and they're not going to do lasting damage. And they don't actually get in the way too much either. They're not necessarily limiting your mobility. And the most common punches you're going to be doing in ITF are going to be jabs and crosses. Occasional uppercuts if you get in close, but it's just going to be jabs and crosses. So you're not going to have to be using like open hand techniques. It's not going to be like the pumsi or the tools or kata. You're not going to be doing these fancy kind of, oh, I have to have my hand in a particular position. No, it's going to be just straight punches for the most part. You will also be required to wear a gum shield. Now, again, gum shields, I value and appreciate what a gum shield is for, but I don't like wearing them. Every single gum shield I've had has restricted my breathing, and I find it really, really hard to ventilate with a gum shield in. And even when I've invested actually some money in good gum shields, I find them a bit of a trouble. The best gum shield I've had was actually the last one I bought. And even that, when I put that gum shield in, I could still feel it chunking out my mouth. And my main concern was more about clenching my teeth to keep the gum shield in, as opposed to what my opponent's doing. And that, you know, you're going to spar somebody, you shouldn't be worried about your gum shield popping out. You should just be focused on what this person does. So even though I see the value of gum shields, I recognize the value of gum shields. I recommend people to use gum shields. I just personally don't like them. But that being said, another piece of equipment you're going to be wearing is going to be your groin protector, otherwise known as a box or a cup. Now, this is basically like a plastic, I don't even know how to describe it. It's more like a hand-shaped plastic scoop, and you put that into these special made underpants, and you wear them on the inside of your dobok trousers, and you get the scoop and you position the scoop over your manly parts and your testicles. And the reason is to protect yourself from groin strikes, because they do happen, but most of the time groin strikes happen, and I've had this experience myself, is if you go to do a technique, your leg's up in the air, your groin is now exposed in the air, and somebody tries doing a counter strike and they hit you in the groin. So groin guards, get yourself a good one. They are worth it, and have merry fun with that. The last piece of equipment with ITF sparring is going to actually be head guards. Now, I have seen these are optional. I've been to tournaments where people have chosen not to wear them. I've been to competitions where it's mandatory that you do wear them. And again, if you're going into top level ITF competitions, they're going to be red or blue. But if you're going to like a local club event, then it doesn't really matter what color you're going to have. But the head guard itself, they're generally made with to encompass your whole head except your forehead and the front of your face. Your face is the only thing that's not covered. The sides of your head are, the top of your head is, the back of your head is. Now, it was said to me once that actually head guards are not necessarily to protect your head from kicks and punches. What they're there to protect you from is if you get kicked to the floor and you're to hit your head on the floor, the head guard's actually going to help reduce a concussion or reduce a head injury that you're going to have. I have never actually been kicked over in a competition which I've done. I mean, I've fallen over in a sparring competition I did. That was my own stupid fault. I did a kick which mislanded him and I did it into a forward roll. But in terms of actually being hit and kicked to the floor, no. So I can't vouch for that part of the head guard. But again, I would actually recommend head guards, especially if you're going up into like more heavyweight categories, or if you're going up against people who generally like throwing punches and kicks to your head. It's gonna, one of these days you are going to get a clip around the ear. So yeah, I'd certainly invest in a head guard and you'll thank me for it when that day comes. So that's the equipment of ITF Taekwondo. So in comparison, when you get the WT style of Taekwondo, the Olympic style of Taekwondo, like we said earlier, you're going to have similarities, but you're going to have a lot of differences as well. Say you enlisted or enrolled in a WT Taekwondo school, you went to a sparring competition for WT Taekwondo. What equipment are you expected to wear? So we'll start off, you will wear foot protectors, but not like the ITF ones, which, as we said, were these big, like soft padded boots. The WT foot protectors are literally like socks. They are toeless socks, and they're meant to actually fit your foot almost perfectly, and your toes can stick out the ends. They don't have as much padding as the ITF boots at all. If anything, these foot protectors WT Taekwondo have are like really flimsy and paper thin. In my mind, that's not really protecting much at all. And that's just my personal opinion coming across. I'd rather wear those padded boots. And even as I said earlier, I'm not a fan of those padded boots, but at least you know when you wear those padded boots from ITF, you're going to have your whole foot covered and protected, not these like flimsy sock things. Groin protector, again, WT is going to be the same as ITF. You're going to have to wear a groin protector to protect your most vulnerable parts. That'll be underneath your dobok as well. You will have shin protectors as well. And sorry, that's something actually with ITF Taekwondo too. You wear shin protectors. Usually you've got these elastic shin protectors. You slide over your foot and you pull up onto your shin. And it usually covers from the very base of your shin right up to the just below your knee. The amount of knee clashes that you're going to get in Taekwondo, both ITF and WT, is phenomenal. So shin protectors. You're also going to be wearing gloves in WT. Now, this was never a thing with WT Taekwondo sparring. You always used to fight just bare-fisted. You used to have like forearm protectors as well. Again, it's like some elastic protection, padded protection from basically your wrist right down to your elbow of just padded out cotton and elastic. It didn't really do much. Quite often, actually, I would spar without the arm protectors. I just didn't really see the point of them, which I will actually come on to a bit later on as to elaborating why I chose not to do that. But up until probably about 2008, in WT Taekwondo, they didn't have gloves. Then suddenly these gloves appeared, and this was purely an image and a style thing. MMA was becoming quite big towards the late 2000s, going into early 2010s and beyond. And of course, we all know the MMA gloves. They are fingerless gloves, nice chunky padding all around. I personally think they look quite cool gloves. And they are practical. I've got a pair, I spar with them. So they are practical. You can grab as well as you can strike. WT Taekwondo introduced their own fingerless gloves purely to mimic the MMA ones. WT basically wanted to look cool. And WT do a lot of things to try and look cool. That's mostly in the Pumsi side of things, but that's a discussion for another time. But so WT introduced these fingerless gloves. Again, hardly any padding at all. The most padding you're going to get is actually, strangely enough, they have like a little rounded bit just on the inside of your palm here, and that's so if like kicks come in, you can kind of like slap them away with this padded bit. I feel that shows a lot about where WT's Taekwondo's technique defense approach really lies, for want of better phrase. But the gloves themselves, again, they're not going to protect your wrist. You got to punch somebody, and again, they're not going to offer that much protection. To be honest, it's quite sad because it's just an image thing to look cool more than anything. WT, you'll also be expected to wear a gum shield, much like ITF, and you'll also wear a headguard as well. But it's a slightly different type of headguard to the ITF one. It'll still have the same similarities of where your face will be exposed, but it's generally not as protected. The most protection you're going to get are these chunky bits over your ears, much like headphones. But the rest of the headguard itself is not really going to actually have that much protection. They have these like gaps for aeration, and you can still like land techniques through the gaps and kick somebody actually in the head. And I don't want this to sound necessarily as though I'm just slating the WT equipment check. But generally speaking, it's like I find that actually when you consider WT Taekwondo is meant to be full contact, it's meant to be like an Olympic sport, a knockout sport. Not much has been done to invest in proper protection. Whereas ITF, which we said earlier, was meant to be for semi-contact, light contact sport, seems to have a better understanding of what needs to be protected. The main difference in equipment between WT and ITF, though, is in WT Taekwondo Sparring, you'll wear what's called a hugu. And in Korean, that is body armor. And it'll be a big, chunky piece. It used to almost be like a card in a way, but it's like leather. Manufactured, tailored leather casing that you put over your body. It looks very much like military body armor that you'd wear if you went into combat. It'll cover the side of your trunk, it'll cover the front up until about just below your neck, it'll cover the trunk of the other side, and it never used to be able to cover the back, but recent body armors now, they do actually fold around the back and you can strap them all in. And they also have protection, like little wings, I used to call them, on your shoulders as well, to protect from like axe kicks and stuff on your shoulders. So to be fair, actually, to WT, I do agree with wearing that body armor, because if you are actually taking heavy hits to your body, you don't want to have like busted up ribs or concussion, well, not concussion, but internal damage from taking all these heavy kicks, like back kicks and high-powered roundhouse kicks into your midsection, which could rupture a rib. So I do agree with that. Maybe if you're actually doing training and conditioning training for sparring, personally, I've always thought, actually, let's not wear the body armor. Let's naturally condition ourselves up. But if you are going into, say, like a full contact sparring competition or a full contact fight, it pays to wear these things, especially if you're going to be up against people who like to get quite heavy, I'd say, with the kicks. So that's the similarities and differences in terms of equipment. So in terms of technique and strategies, this really is kind of like, we could look at this from a historical perspective. We could look at it from a contemporary modern perspective. So going back to ITF have generally always had, as part of their sparring strategies, sliding in off the lead leg as a lead leg side kick. And most often you'll see in pretty much most ITF schools when they spar, they'll start off sparring figures and one will lift up their lead leg and bounce towards the other one and use it to kick out, either to keep their opponent at a distance or to actually try and use those kicks as techniques in themselves. When I was with Gemini, we practiced this technique. We called it the Beast, but essentially it is like a sliding in lead leg side kick. It's also hard as well for your opponent to get their kicks around that lead leg side kick, because they're going to clash their legs with yours. Hence why those shin guards come in useful in this situation. But that will usually be the most conventional technique you're going to get in ITF, kick-wise. And a lot of what the sparrers will then do after that will depend on how their opponent responds. So it's very, very common in ITF sparring as well. If I was to come in with that lead leg side kick and I'm sparring somebody and their guard comes down, thinking that they're going to try and block and deflect against that kick coming in towards the midsection, I've now left my whole head open. So the guy who's coming in with that lead leg side kick can see that my opponent's arms have come down. Next common technique would be to actually then what's called the blitz, and they'll actually come in and basically jump into you with their hands, going for your head, which is very, very effective, and it's misleading. It's tactical as well, because you're feinting towards the middle, you're drawing your opponent's attention towards the middle, but you're actually intending then to punch them at the face. So you're not even trying to kick them. You're using the kick as a setup. So that's a very effective ITF method. I've been caught with that several times in my ITF sparring career, and it's quite a mainstream tactic to use in ITF schools and sparring. In terms of kicks as well, actually, you're going to get quite a few. You're going to get like all the traditional Taekwondo technique. Much emphasis placed on hook kicks. Of course, you still do see them. You still do see them, but they're not as common as what you get in WT Taekwondo. Likewise as well. Likewise as well, actually, you're not going to get as many like double roundhouse kicks, which are much more common in WT. That again do happen in ITF, but they're not commonly seen. It is going to be like your front leg side kicks, followed by the punches. Quite often as well, actually, another tactic will be that if somebody is in close to you, they'll try blitzing you with their hands. You will try moving away, obviously, to get out of that situation. And as you pull away, they'll then use that to roundhouse kick you. They'll use that distance, and they'll use the power of their legs to try and catch you as you try to retreat. Footwork-wise, ITF, I feel, generally make better use of footwork as well. There'll be a lot of training will be involving feints. A lot of training will be involving ring craft as well. So ITF Taekwondo, it's quite common that if you're trying to chase somebody down, your opponent won't be retreating in a straight line. ITF schools are very good at training people to actually like move off the center line. So you try chasing somebody down, they'll move around you in a circle. And that's generally quite a good sign or a good indicator that you're up against a good sparrer, because if he moves back, what's going to happen is that you're just going to keep chasing him. Whereas if he moves to the side, you've now got to stop, you've got to turn, and then you've got to come at him at a different angle. He then moves off center line again. So the fight is, or the spar is never like one line. It's actually going to be going round in a big circle. And ITF schools generally teach a lot of footwork as well. But not only that, they're actually, ITF is quite good at being able to, or a good ITF school usually counters off moving off the center line as well. So they'll take themselves off the center line, but they'll still be in a position in which to be able to actually counter back. So it's not just move off center line and stay, it's move off center line and retaliate. In terms of like the WT sparring, we can look at this from two different perspectives. Until recently, I'd say before 2008, it's sometimes known as the power era of Taekwondo. As we said earlier, that's when you don't have your gloves. The body armor, you had it, but it was very, very thin. And sometimes getting a kick on this body armor, it felt as though you may not have even been wearing body armor at all, because you could feel the impact go straight through. In this power era of Taekwondo before 2008, common techniques were always rear legs, roundhouse kicks, rear leg roundhouse kicks to the body. And in WT Taekwondo, you can kick to the head. Indeed, it's encouraged to kick to the head, because the whole goal of Olympic full contact WT sparring is to actually knock somebody out. You don't see it that much. It is a bit of a rarity. But that being said, a lot of fighters will still try kicking towards the body because it uses up less energy. you could probably get off like, say, 10 roundhouse kicks to somebody's body and only then start to work up a sweat. Or you could do, say, 3 roundhouse kicks to somebody's head, and you're starting to feel yourself becoming fatigued, because trying to kick somebody's head takes up a lot more energy than kicking somebody's body. So you'd still get lots of techniques and roundhouse kicks. The trademark technique was a roundhouse kick towards your opponent's body armor or into their torso and trunk. That began to change after 2008. That is when the WT decided to get rid of the old style body armors, and they started to bring in electronic sensor body armor. So your body armor was equipped with like these pressure sensors. And basically, as the name implies, if there's a lot of pressure put onto the body armor, your body armor would think that you've been hit. So it would register on the judge's panel that, oh, a kick has been landed. So the whole name of the game then took out the whole power aspect. It just became, all you've got to do is literally just tap your opponent to register that you've actually hit them. And that way you're not going to use up all your energy. You're still going to be quite mobile, quite up, not drained, not fatigued, and you could still spar and win. This is when Taekwondo, many people would say, kind of went downhill, because people were literally just started to use what was called foot fencing. It became a little bit similar to ITF in some ways, that WT then started literally just forgetting all the rear leg roundhouse kicks. They just literally started lifting up their front leg and flicking it out, much like the sliding in lead leg side kick from ITF. But it was a slight different mechanic. This technique became known as the cut kick. I have no idea how it became known as the cut kick. I don't even know who called it the cut kick, but it's not a powerful technique in itself. It's literally just like a flick of the lead leg designed to hit the body armor to register that actually a technique has been scored. It completely took away the whole power dynamic of WT Taekwondo. That then led on to something called the flop kick, where you do the cut kick. That would either hit or your opponent would block, but you would still have your leg up, and then you'd like swing it over their head. That technique used to be called a scorpion kick back in the day. Then it became known as like a Brazilian kick as well, question mark kick. But yeah, WT kind of then made the most of it and decided to call it the flop kick. And you started getting all these, in this day and age of WT Taekwondo Sparring, you start getting all these strange named techniques. There's like the Moldova kick, where you lean back. Somebody's coming at you with that cut kick. You lean back underneath their leg and roundhouse kick them up, and it's called a Moldova kick, apparently. You get something called the slug kick. I may do a video on that another time. Punches. Traditionally, punches did score in old school power era WT Taekwondo. Whereas ITF Taekwondo, you're going to see a lot of punches. And the punches in ITF are coming towards your face. And as you said earlier with protection, that's why you have those gloves. When the punches come in ITF Taekwondo, some people said it almost becomes kickboxing. And I can see why they say that. But when you go to WT Taekwondo, old school, they said, yeah, you can still punch, but all the punches are going to be to the body. There's no punches to the head. Even though people could still use punches in WT Taekwondo, they rarely did. Just because the whole philosophy of Taekwondo is that your legs are going to be more stronger than your arms. So in the power era especially, kick somebody because you're going to do more damage. And Taekwondo is a long distance art as well. It's not designed to be used in close, not from a sport aspect anyway. Since 2008, when they introduced the gloves, Kukkiwon and World Taekwondo wanted to reintroduce the punches a bit more. I don't know, they realized that actually, let's make Taekwondo a bit more jazzed up with these new fancy gloves. So you're beginning to see a few more punches now in WT Taekwondo, but again, it's always to the body armor. There's no punches to the face. And you also get a technique now coming around in WT called the push, where if somebody gets too close to you, you can push from the back. And that's quite similar to what we were saying in ITF, where in ITF, a technique, we come in to blitz your opponent with the fists. They try and retreat. You then clobber them with a roundhouse kick. With the push in WT Taekwondo, you're pushing somebody back. And as they stagger back, you're then following through of a roundhouse kick to their body to send them on their way. So those are the main differences in techniques and strategies. And again, like with WT Taekwondo footwork, a lot of the footwork is not necessarily sort of strategy per se. It's a lot of the footwork is like, how can we get combos out? And you'll see a lot of WT Taekwondo players or fighters training footwork, and they'll be training like lots of different angles of attack. They'll be doing a lot of like double roundhouse kicks on the pads or on kick shields and what have you, training aids called bobs. But you don't see much of that actually in the sparring itself. So it's not necessarily applied. It's not implemented training into the sparring. In that regard, I still feel that ITF has very much the upper hand when it comes to footwork, because that footwork that they use in ITF is very much a game plan. It's not just, let's use this for our combinations of kicks. Let's use this to kind of, if we're being attacked, how do we use our footwork to get out of a situation? Or how can I get into you by using aggressive footwork? So WT seems to lack that. And again, if you watch like the Olympics, quite often you'll see the two WT Taekwondo fighters just standing there, and they'll be going like, one goes in front, one slides back kind of thing. It's not a case of one will move in and the other will dart around. You won't see that much of that type of foot play in WT. There is another type of Taekwondo which came around in the 90s. It was called Pro Taekwondo. And that was almost like an attempt to blend ITF and WT Taekwondo into one. It had the power era kicks of WT Taekwondo, but it also had the hand techniques of ITF. And Pro Taekwondo, I'd say, was very interesting to watch. I certainly liked it. I considered even giving it a go at one stage of my life. So I'd recommend people actually watch that. You can find videos on YouTube. Likewise as well, they're seeming to kind of like, that kind of died a death. It died a death, I think, like the early 2000s, and I don't know what happened to it. It just kind of went into the underground. It seems to have made a bit of a comeback now, but it's called Combat Taekwondo. And this is something which is kind of following on from what's called combat karate. We're seeing a lot of competitions these days called combat karate, which aesthetically, it's these two fighters getting into this little pit, and you've got these like digital screens all around them of cityscapes or deserts or jungles or what have you. That is pretty beautiful in itself, but it's more like a full contact level of karate. I like it. I think it's quite interesting to watch. But then Combat Taekwondo, I think, was trying to resurrect the past glory of Pro Taekwondo competitions, but then also match up to this combat karate competition format. So that's quite interesting. So those are the main differences and similarities with ITF Taekwondo Sparring and WT Taekwondo Sparring. In just a summary, WT Taekwondo is considered full contact. It's in the Olympics. The emphasis is a lot on scoring points. You're wearing body armor. You have gloves, you have foot protectors. Main game is to knock your opponent out, but you generally don't see that. It's all about winning points. ITF Taekwondo, considered semi-contact or light contact, have less protection, but the protection they have is generally of a better standard. And that is not necessarily about knocking your opponent out, even though knockouts do happen. And oddly enough, when people get knocked out, actually the person who knocked them out is proclaimed the winner. So that's a bit of a strange one in and of itself. But that one is mostly about trying to score points, but it generally is a bit more robust, I would say, than the WT, to be honest. Maybe because actually the whole emphasis on like the hands as well with ITF generally makes ITF players or fighters a bit more sort of appreciative of different combos, of like in combining hand techniques with leg techniques and learning the ring craft behind that. Whereas in WT, it's mostly about, okay, I just need to hit onto this body armor to register that actually I've kicked them. and that should be enough for me to score a point and to win. But all I can speak from is my personal experience and my personal preference. I mean, I personally prefer the sparring to ITF Taekwondo, which has been probably quite apparent in this video. But give them both a go. I'd say give them both a go and see which ones work for you, which ones you prefer. And then ask yourself, why do I prefer these ones? Do I like having the punches towards the face because it adds a bit more of an excitement, a bit more of adrenaline? Or do I like maybe the scoring point aspect because it encourages me to now not necessarily be powerful, but it encourages me to be quick and to think a bit more tactically? So that's the video on the two main styles of Taekwondo. Of course, you get lots of other different sub-styles of Taekwondo as well, which are offshoots. Some take after the WT, some take after the ITF, some try and combine the two, some kind of like make up some sort of concoction of themselves, which is a little bit detached from both. But it's a big art. It's a big martial art. So there's going to be something for everyone. You know, whether you want to be like a top-notch sparrer or if you just want to have like a bit of fun just doing the sparring. There's something for everybody in Taekwondo. So I'd recommend giving it a go. That's it for today. Catch you guys later. Stay safe, train hard, and keep listening to Pantera because they're the best band around. And I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.